Hello again. My name is Leslie Thatcher. Welcome to you all for joining us and viewing us in a recording. We're so happy that you're here today for the second of our two-part technology conversation series. My name is Leslie Thatcher, Director of College Success at Perkins. I have the privilege of leading a national conversation with Perkins School for the Blind and all of you about the state of college readiness for our students learning with low vision and blindness. I also direct Compass for students grade 9 through 12, their family and educators, a virtual program that you'll learn about more later. We're so grateful to have you here connecting with us virtually. It is one of the real true silver linings in this past year that we've had. Let us go over a few things before we get started. Today's conversation will be recorded, as I noted, and sent to you all attending post-conference via email. All cameras, microphones will remain turned off for the duration of the conversation. That said, we very much want you to all be part of this conversation, just Zoom style. What that means is the Q&A portion of the Zoom interface is for you to direct your questions to our panelists that will be convening after Dr. Ting's lecture, and we will monitor those questions and work to share them among panelists. The chat is for technical questions or support that will go to our tech support. Closed captioning is available and can be accessed through your Zoom toolbar. To view captions, click the CC box and choose Show Subtitles. Subtitle settings will make the font larger and smaller. If you would benefit from a copy of this PowerPoint for accessibility reasons, please email us at collegesuccess@perkins.org, and that information will also be put in the chat. Our conversation series has been created in the spirit of curiosity and collaboration. Our first conversation with Dr. Marianne Wolf explored the reading brain and the implications for our students and thus our teaching as we live in times where accessing information is increasingly managed and digested digitally in our very active brains. Our daily lives are managed online, our students research online, often not via printed and brailled books anymore. That creates extraordinary opportunities for us all, but it must also call us as educators to consider the implications and change our practice to create the greatest opportunities to grow our students into their greatest potential. Today's talk with Dr. Yue-Ting Siu is appropriately entitled Literacy Through Technology, Effective Supports, Implementation, and True Equity. The time is right for this conversation. As an example, today we have registrants from 9 countries, including nearly every continent: Uganda, Canada, India, China, Turkey, the Dominican Republic, Brazil, Ecuador, and the US. We have over 18 states from the US represented in our audience today. These themes and concerns that will be talked about and discussed are universal. Let us start. College Success at Perkins began in 2016 to address the persistent challenge in our field, the grievously low college completion rates for students attending college with blindness and low vision. Generally, we know that less than 40% of those students who start college courses actually graduate with a degree within about 7 or so years, which is a standard measure in the field. Perkins created several initiatives to address this complex issue. You're participating in one of them today. But our newest direct service program, Compass, is a 9-month virtual coaching program working to bring together student, family, and teachers holistically through individual coaching and monthly workshops. In addition to this direct service effort, we'll launch a college readiness resource early this fall on Perkins' brand new, just launched yesterday website to help our community explore college with greater information and sophistication. You'll all get an announcement about this. We've also created and published a college readiness checklist and are about to debut a Technology Competencies for college readiness checklist as well. These will be available for download online. And we're additionally supporting our friends in higher education through a Promising Practices Guide for Disability Service Offices, and are actually hosting a workshop next month for those folks, and we'll produce that guide next spring. So we must also look to all of us as adults engaged in this work, and you all on this call are those special people, in order to begin to explore what's happening systemically. Thus, we began in this national conversation by hosting a co-laboratory, which is an intentionally designed, facilitated conversation using focused, carefully constructed, driving questions with 20 stakeholders from across the blindness community, VR counselors, leaders from every level of the education system, TVIs providing on-the-ground insights and leadership experiences, and the range of perspectives we needed to answer these urgent needs about systemic barriers to college readiness. We discovered a deep need to reset our collaboration brains between blindness educators, VR counselors, special educators, general educators, and parents. There are many different worlds our students are engaged and working through and seeking support from, and it appears we would benefit from greater coordination and collaboration. We discovered that there's crucial gaps in understanding the unique needs of our learners with blindness and visual impairment among our well-intentioned colleagues. The technology revolution of the last 15 to 20 years has accelerated and exacerbated these gaps. These gaps lead to students often not being prepared with the skills they need to learn alongside their typically cited peers, leading to the longstanding issue of lack of college completion I alluded to earlier. Similar challenges transfer to the employment side as well. While I would argue that weak college advising is part of this issue, the gap in skills for our students is real and it's an issue. The collab solidified our recognition that focusing on technology in this conversation, including the one today with Dr. Ting, was essential. I often speak about the foundational need for ongoing concept development for our students. They build on each other, these concepts. And we know so much that students learning with visual impairments miss much through the missed incidental learning that helps build concepts about the world around them. Learning and using a technology as a tool for learning and living is no different. Concepts build on concepts in terms of using and becoming a digital native, and the information gleaned from the seas of access builds on itself as well. As I did in our first technology conversation, I encourage us to lead, learn, and keep this conversation going far beyond today. I don't say this lightly. I know we're all busy and in some cases possibly feeling overwhelmed. We need to do more, however, to connect the dots. And I would argue it may make our jobs easier in the long run and create much better outcomes for our students moving forward, which is why we're all in this together. Dr. Ting and our following panel will enrich this proposition. Quick reminder, the Q&A is to drop a question to our panelists and Dr. Ting. Beyond that, we're ready to get started. I am honored to introduce today's keynote speaker, Dr. Yue-Ting Siu. She will be discussing literacy through technology, effective supports, implementation, and true equity. Dr. Ting is a professor in the program for visual impairments in the Department of Special Education at San Francisco State University. Her interests and area of work include the role of communities of practice to support itinerant teachers, professional development, development of educational practice and technology that support multimedia accessibility, teacher adoption of technology, including professional use, assessment, and implementation with students. I cannot think of anybody better suited to speak to this issue than Dr. Ting. I'm delighted to welcome her here today. Take it on, Ting. I see your camera's on. Bring up that PowerPoint and we're good to go.
Okay, thank you, Leslie, and thank you, Perkins, for having me today. And it's really lovely to see some familiar names in the attendee list. So I know we're all kind of discussing and speaking among friends today. So let me get my PowerPoint fired up here. Okay, here we go. As Leslie mentioned, I coordinate the teacher training program in visual impairments at San Francisco State University. And for any social media birds out there, you can find me on Twitter at TVI_Ting. And you can also follow our program resources and information at VI program SFSU. So to start, just to make sure everybody in the audience is kind of clear on where I'm coming from and what terminology we're using, I wanted to give a little introduction to myself. So I am, I guess, generally speaking, a special education teacher. More specifically, I'm a teacher of students with visual impairments, also known as a TVI. And here on this first slide, I have a photo of MacGyver, the original iteration of MacGyver, because I often think of ourselves as the MacGyver of teachers. So here I just superimposed my photo on MacGyver. So this is me, TVI, MacGyver of teachers. That also means that a lot of the times we're kind of hacking our way through education and figuring out how to serve our students. Oftentimes we're in this role as a IEP team coordinator, cat wrangler. We're doing some kind of global education with our school partners, parents, school administrators, IT directors, websites and web administrators. So there's a lot of coordination that we often have to take on as part of being a TVI. And when we end up taking on these extra roles and responsibilities, I feel that we are expanding beyond our scope of a special education teacher and really taking on the role of an accessibility facilitator. I published an article with Rob Emerson a few years ago talking about how with the shift in needs and how technology has changed the way we teach and work with students. TVIs are really situated now to be that accessibility facilitator, which means that we have to understand the needs for accessibility and how to implement things in an equitable way for our students. As part of this work, I am a typically sighted person. I really see myself as an ally to the blindness community. My work is in the area of visual impairments, but I have a limited perspective as somebody who uses her vision, and I have the privilege of not using assistive technology if I choose not to. But I feel like part of my role in being an ally is to promote and empower those who need a community of support to find that empowerment and reclaim that power in this conversation. So in my language that I'm going to use throughout this presentation, you might hear me shift a little bit from person first language to identity first language. I really identify more as a teacher of blind and low vision students in that spirit of using identity first language. That's something that I'm shifting towards out of respect and in a way to honor the preferences of a growing consensus in the blindness community. Okay, so that's kind of the little blurb about me and my background. So what are my stakes and biases really in this conversation? Well, first and foremost, I am and always will be a teacher in the field. I keep a small caseload of students that I see. I'm in the field on Fridays. And in this way, I've really had this, I feel like I had my hands-on experiences kind of understanding and figuring out how technology has changed our field of teaching, even in the last 10 years. I mean, I think back to what I was doing with my students even 5 or 6 years ago, and the ways that we're having to implement technology is so different now than even just a few years ago. So I'm able to bring some of those perspectives, of course, recognizing that I am teaching in the Bay Area. It's definitely an area that's more privileged and has more access to bandwidth and technology in general than in other areas of the country. My work as an assistant professor, I'm definitely a stakeholder in teacher training and credentialing. So I'll be touching upon that a little bit in my assistant professor hat and soapbox. And then a few other roles that I take that I also kind of bring those perspectives into this conversation is I often advise on technology research and development projects. So trying to interpret needs for technology, teach a little bit about the pedagogical understanding of visual impairment when you're developing technology for blind and low vision individuals. What does technology implementation and adoption look like so that we're designing for like practical usability? And then finally, sometimes I work as a multimedia consultant, working with various partners on how do we make sure our educational materials for all students are truly accessible so that we're doing the best job possible to promote best principles in universal design. So, given that the title of this talk is Literacy Through Technology, everybody has a different definition of technology. So hopefully in the next 50 minutes or so, I'm hoping to touch upon literacies in 3 different ways. So number 1, of course, we have the literal literacy. So, what do we need to think about if we're expecting students to navigate textual information and having to train their reading brain, kind of taking a note from Dr. Wolf's talk, but how do we support our students in training their brain to access, navigate, and engage with text in different modalities? How do I use low vision strategies? How do I develop really good braille reading strategies? How might auditory literacy come into play? The second type of literacy is digital literacy. So just having proficient navigation of virtual environments and different uses of technology tools. So just as much as we need to figure out our own literacies just to get through our world, how do we make sure our students have the digital literacy they need to be successful and then also successfully transition to college and then eventually the workplace? And then finally, I wanted also to touch upon systemic literacies. So, as partners, allies, and stakeholders in this conversation, how can we be good allies in navigating the infrastructures and almost having to rebuild and rethink some of these systemic problems that have, have advanced barriers to information access? So how do we rethink these infrastructures and find the partners we need to rebuild as needed? So, there's technology functions differently for different people. And I think that when we look at the role of technology specific to blind and low vision students, it's a little bit different than for your typically sighted peers and for people who never have to worry about the classic or traditional access needs. When technology is on the scene for our blind and low vision students, our students now have a potential for more immediate and self-determined access to information. And I say potential here because it's, even if we have the right tools and skills, there are still other barriers and systemic barriers that might prevent access. But when students have the good technology in their hands, that potential is more readily there. Technology also helps our blind and low vision learners have an experience with authentic collaborations with peers. Authentic meaning they can work in the moment with their typically sighted peers. They don't have to wait for a paraprofessional or wait for sighted assistants or wait for an adult to come and mediate their access. When technology is best implemented, there are ways for our students to engage directly and in real time. And they can have that peer-to-peer collaboration that we strive for with all students. So finally, technology empowers our blind and low vision students to dictate their own access points and tools. So this means that students have on-demand accessibility, so they can choose when and how they want to access information. And by doing so, students can claim or reclaim these positions of leadership and power that are in some cases never available or have not been available to them. So this is a big thing with technology, and part of my love for technology is seeing our students being able to be leaders in their classroom and exercise positions of power. And this is going to take them onto successful transitions to college, and this is also going to allow them to be competitive in whatever workplace our students might choose to pursue. In summary, this is basically all about the power dynamic and how those who have access to information are the ones who hold power in any room. So technology has that ability to empower our students by facilitating their access to information. So, we talked about the role of technology for students, but what about the role of students in access technology? And this is a little bit different of a shift because we're always talking about how technology works for students. And we are coming from this framework of independence. So here on the slide, we have a comparison of two diagrams. And on the left side slide, it's a diagram kind of depicting how independence typically works for our students and their AT, which stands for access or assistive technology. So we typically think of a non-disabled person interacting directly with the environment, and then with a disabled person requiring assistive technology to then access the environment. And we're coming very much from this model of independence and how technology can, ensure independence, quote unquote. But if you think about the larger context of independence, truly none of us are ever 100% independent. Rather on the second side of the slide, it's more a model of interdependence and how a lot of different factors of an interaction among all the different parts have to happen in order for there to be good access. So it's not all just about having that assistive technology to access the environment, but rather it's the constant collaboration, communication, and working together among several different people and with several partners working in the environment, and kind of having that embedded use of AT in the mix, in this more interdependent model of access to the environment. And I have to credit Cindy Bennett for this work, discovering this article that she published talking about interdependence and kind of updating our approach to assistive technology design and implementation with this model. It really changed how I think about how students can be a part of how technology can work for them, and for us to see our students as very valuable partners in figuring out how technology is going to work for them in the scope of their life. So how do we empower students to be these active partners in the assistive technology landscape? How do we empower our students to, number one, access information in multiple modalities? As mentioned before, students sometimes, we skip over those basic steps of making sure they've got the appropriate sensory skills that they need to take in information in different ways. The brain has to learn to interact and engage and synthesize information using different senses. So I think as part of being that stakeholder and educator role, it's part of our job to nurture that development of sensory skills and ensuring that our students have diverse ways of interacting with information. And this is all kind of lines up with the Universal Design for Learning framework, having multiple modalities and ways of accessing, engaging, and expressing knowledge of information. How do we empower students to understand what they need? Because at the end of the day, there's not going to be a TVI advocating for the student all the time throughout their whole life. Students ultimately need to understand what they need so that they can be strong advocates for themselves and eventually advocates for other of their blind or low vision peers. So in order for students to really understand what they need, and not only understand what they need, but feel entitled to what they need, and it's that entitlement that's going to help ensure their success in the classroom, we need to offer students early and multiple opportunities for quote unquote incidental learning. And I put incidental in quotes because for our students, it's got to be these incidental learning experiences where maybe they hear voiceover happening when you're looking up a phone number, they hear voiceover when you're looking up information on the web. For us, unless you or I, unless we are a daily, day-to-day user of access technology, these are not going to be incidental experiences for us because we have to make that decision to turn on voiceover or turn on a screen reader and make our devices talk or hook up a braille display that we wouldn't typically be using. But ensuring and kind of designing for these natural opportunities for our students to discover different ways of how information can be, interacted with. I think that's really important for our little guys. You think about how toddlers, even before they are communicating independently, they see how technology is being used all around them. They see how a parent is, calling a person and not calling a number. Even preschoolers in the classroom, they see how a teacher goes to the computer and prints something off and a piece of paper comes out of the printer. Well, for our students who have those sort of missed visual opportunities, we need to make sure those sort of similar opportunities are available so that our students have equity in exposure to those incidental technology experiences. So this ultimately brings us to the final question and sort of the big deal question of what Perkins is doing is, how do we empower students to meet the technology competencies that are on par with typically cited peers? Perkins is taking the lead on building a technology competencies checklist. It's a great checklist that includes some related areas that we have to think about in order to ensure students are ready to transition and they have the tech skills that they need. But interestingly, when you look at the technology competency checklist, it's nothing that unusual. It's nothing that specific to blindness or having low vision, but rather these are technology competencies that every student needs to transition successfully to college and to the greater world and to the workplace. That's kind of what I love about this checklist is it's a reminder that our students need to be held to the same standard for technology use and achievement in the classroom as any other student who needs technology to achieve in their life. So, that brings me to one of my favorite statements, which is that technology is everything, but everything is not technology. So, so far, I've talked mostly on the student focus of, how do we prepare students and what sorts of things do we have to consider for student interventions? So far I'm talking really on the side of what tools and skills students need to have embedded in their skill set for transition. But everything is not technology. Kind of recalling Cindy Bennett's interdependence framework, there's also this huge environmental impact and many environmental factors that go with successful implementation and that go with achieving equity in the classroom. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about what that is in the environment, because if we focus all of our energies just on the student intervention piece, we're missing this whole other area of intervention with the environment. And this is the part that we as stakeholders can really have a big, push in. We're missing half the puzzle. And so I really believe that by focusing on both student tools and skills, and also the information environment, we need interventions on both sides, kind of with equal effort in order to really make an impact in what we're trying to do here. So I've used the word equity a bit, and I have a photo here. This is taken from Tony Ruth's Equity series in 2019. And he actually had a 4-panel series, but I'm just going to focus on the panel here on equity since we've been talking about this a bit in our conversation. So on this image, we have an apple tree that's leaning slightly to the left. And it just so happens on the side that's leaning to the left, more of the apples are also on this left side. And we've got 2 kids on tall step ladders that are both picking apples from the tree. So one student has a shorter ladder and she's picking apples from the left side of the tree that's hanging lower. So she needs a shorter ladder. And then we have a student who needs a taller ladder to access the apples that are on the right side of the tree because the tree is leaning away from her. So I feel like this is where we are right now in terms of assistive and access technology. We've got mainstream and specialized tools that can be customized for student needs. So some students need a shorter or taller ladder. This kind of parallels our students' needs for different types of technology in order to access the apple tree or to access their learning media or computing environments. So with equity, we have custom tools that identify and address inequalities of access. But this isn't the final step. We can actually push a step further and move from equity towards justice. And so justice is the 4th and final panel in Tony Ruth's Equity series. And the difference here between equity and justice is that in justice, the tree is no longer leaning to the left. Rather, there are some support beams that are structural support beams that are helping the tree stand straight up. And now that the tree is standing straight up, it's the distribution of apples are all around the tree instead of being clustered to the left side. And so, with the support beams, this is literally the infrastructure. There's an improved infrastructure that's helping the tree stand up. And justice happens when you can fix the system and offer equal access to both tools and opportunities. So justice here is when that tree is offers equitable opportunities to everybody. And yes, different people picking apples might still have a shorter or taller ladder, depending on what your needs are. But this is what we need to strive for, is not just making sure there's the right ladder for the person picking the apples and focusing on the person at the intervention, but looking at intervention as a whole, including the environmental and infrastructure support that are necessary. So just to kind of summarize that little spiel, we must address environmental factors if we're going to move from equity to justice in the classroom. So how do we make that happen? Easy to say and show with a few pictures, right? So I wanted to touch on some very specific ideas and leave you guys with very tangible things that we can do to move forward in this initiative. So, there's some critical supports, and I'm going to start with the low-hanging fruit to go along with the apple tree theme. So the low-hanging fruit, it really starts at the local level. So our students need accessible media, and I have a feeling I'm preaching to the choir here. But as part of ensuring that our students have accessible media, of course, it's in the federal mandate that our students are entitled to accessible educational media, but we need resources to make sure that accessible media is actually available. It's one thing to say it, but how do we carry out this task? And this idea of ensuring that our students have accessible media it's a growing task, and it's a growing need for teachers and anybody on the student's educational team who's supporting the student. Because no longer are we just talking about Braille and large print, we're also talking about appropriate access to images. You have students who need access to digital images. It might be in the form of description, having alt text and digital images, having tactile graphics available when that's appropriate, having 3D models available when that's appropriate. So, we need resources to figure out what to do with that multimedia that includes images and also videos. And, as much as media continues to be designed and disseminated in inaccessible formats, we are always going to need help ensuring that our students have this accessible media. So one thing that I think would be a pretty doable thing, actually, is to consider the idea of having alternate media specialists. Oops, I have a little typo there, excuse me. But alternate media specialists in the K-12 system. University and college systems have entire departments that have alternate media specialists where their entire job and responsibility is to make sure that the classroom media are provided in an accessible format to students. This task often falls on the TVI, and we're often the ones having to adapt materials into the alternate format, or we have to train staff or pairs to do that work of an alternate media specialist. Now, yes, it requires some training to know how to do that and know how to format things, but it's a lot of time taken away from the TVI, and that time could be spent with direct instruction with the students and with collaborative work with the classroom teachers and the IEP team. So every bit of time that we have to dedicate to alternate media, that's time taken away from students, okay? So being able to advocate for this job of an alternate media specialist in K-12, I think is a really great low hanging fruit. It's ripe to be picked. There's job postings for alternate media specialists in higher ed. So, the job model and job descriptions are already available. Secondly, as I sort of was hinting at a few minutes ago, was we need to work on having accessibility in our procurement policies. So, as long as the procurement of inaccessible textbooks, curricula, assessments, or even educational technologies is happening, we're always going to be, fighting this wave after wave of inaccessible materials. And there are also models of how to include accessibility in procurement policies. Specifically, I want to give a shout out to CAST. CAST has an excellent resource that gives template and sample language that you could share with IT directors to say, hey, would you consider putting this in your procurement policies when you're adopting textbooks, curriculum, assessments, and educational technologies? Because ultimately we have to hold the media designers and people working in education, creating educational media responsible, because they're just as responsible as anybody else in ensuring that there's equity and justice in our educational system. Okay, so there are resources available for that, and I really appreciate that CAS has that resource, because sometimes as a teacher, we don't receive training in this, and it's nice to have a resource that we can just give to an IT director. Make sure you know your IT director, make sure you know your administrators, because those are the people who can make some of this stuff happen. Okay. And finally, another low-hanging fruit is building a community of expectations for access. So I think there's a lot of ways we can connect and partner with education to create education among our partners and to promote advocacy efforts at local, regional, and federal levels. But we need people who are going to join us in this call to action, right? We have whatever hat we have. I have my educator hat on, but if I can partner up with people who can make impact at the regional or federal levels, then I need to do that. And so I'm really excited now that I feel like there's growing momentum for accessibility. We've got standards and guidelines. Not that we're always, not that it has to be ruled by standard and guidelines, but there is hopefully a growing awareness of accessibility. And there's also a celebration of diversity and how different people work in the world and how different people communicate, how people identify, how people engage with information. So I think that's a really neat shift in just recognizing and celebrating that diversity. And we can kind of take advantage of that and make sure that when we have conversations about social justice and equity, that the disability piece is also within that conversation. I think also building community expectations for access can help us bridge success between the lower hanging fruits that we're talking about here and also the higher hanging fruits. So the higher hanging but still reachable fruit. So there's a couple critical supports necessary in this area as well, I think. The number one big one is, of course, promoting universal design, and not necessarily for learning. We have universal design for learning, making sure that that's a principle and those are concepts that are kind of prioritized in a school district and an educational program. But there's also universal design needed for technology. So making sure that as these technologies are developed, that we're thinking about including accessible tools for people to access information, but also tools for people to engage with information and be interactive and how they can manipulate information. And finally, we also have to ensure that as many tools there are for access, there's also tools for designing and creating and making, so that our blind and low vision learners are also in those positions of designing and making and building and creating. I think sometimes we focus so much on just the access piece that some of those tools for making and designing we encounter later, and we have to react to these tools being inaccessible. Where if we can be a little bit more proactive about it, then we can be less reactive. And this goes back to the low-hanging fruit of making sure that there's accessibility in procurement policies, because school districts are the customer. They're the one paying the big bucks to procure all these things. And I think until school districts demand accessibility in all the products that they procure, we're always going to be pushing back against this barrier. Okay, and how do we get school districts to break those barriers, and how do we get the school districts to really speak with their wallets and say, no, we're not going to buy things that are inaccessible. Until school districts say that, products are still not going to be designed well. So I think this is an area where, if we can get the word out from parents and community partners and kind of know where the pressure points are, we've got the educational pieces and resources to do that, we can really start making some serious headway here, which I think is also very exciting. And then finally, this is probably my latest little soapbox platform. I think we also need to look at key partnerships between general education and special education teachers. And yes, this concept is not new. I didn't think of it. This has been an ongoing and long-standing challenge in teaching and in education, is how do we break down the barriers between gen ed and special ed? We have general education teacher training programs, special education training programs. Often these teachers are working in their own silos. It's, unless you've got enough collaboration time in a student's IEP, it's hard to, carve out enough time. And, I think it's really important that there's collaboration time on a student's IEP to make sure that the collaboration minutes are being spent to check in with the gen ed teachers. But here's where things could get really interesting. I think in special ed, we talk about inclusion. We talk about, adapting materials, making sure accommodations are in place. But universal design for learning wasn't made for special education. If general education, that's really where we can be looking at how UDL can be embedded, because if the general ed teacher is creating materials that are universally designed for accessibility, universally designed for diverse engagement, regardless of whether or not you have a visual impairment or not. But when you have a gen ed teacher who really knows UDL and who really knows how to design learning materials for multimodal engagement, you end up also having more of a partnership in serving the students who have, quote unquote, special needs. But you also have partnership in serving your diverse learners. And now our TVIs are no longer working in silos. Gen ed teachers can take back some ownership in serving that blind and low vision student, even if they've never served a blind and low vision student before. So that's the ideal, right? Unfortunately, I was very shocked and disappointed to discover in this past year that UDL is not a baseline teacher competency for gen ed teachers. And until we can advocate that UDL is a baseline teacher competency for all teachers, we're going to be very limited in how well classroom gen ed teachers and special education teachers can come together and really practice UDL in all aspects of education. So, some of you might be really surprised to hear this. And what do I mean by it's not a baseline teacher competency? Well, in California, when I look at the EdTPA, so the EdTPA is a teacher performance assessment that everybody coming out of a teacher program, they have to do this EdTPA, and it's an assessment portfolio, and they have to pass the EdTPA in order to get their teacher credential or teacher certificate in that state, okay? So when you go through and you grade, teacher candidates' portfolios, UDL is not something that is required of everybody. It's sort of like, oh, if a gen ed teacher demonstrates that they know UDL, oh, that's like a 5, that's a cherry on top. But you only need to score a 3 to become credentialed. So my question to anybody who's got any sort of impact in the credentialing level is, why isn't UDL required at the minimum baseline competency for all teachers? This is a huge area that I think, needs a lot of sort of advocacy. And until we can put UDL in as like a baseline foundational competency, and it's in the credentialing standards for all teachers, general and special education teachers, this partnership between gen ed and special ed is always going to be very limited to just what people can do locally and ad hoc. Okay, so we're rounding the finish line in this presentation here. I wanted to close the loop on our talk centered on literacy and suggest a few targets that we might consider for our students' literacy targets. So just a summary of what we talked about today. Number one, our students have to be literate in navigating multimodal information. So, when they can interact with that multimodal information, they can take advantage of all of the great UDL design materials. Students also need to be literate in proficient use of their various senses for engaging with information. So whether it's visual, auditory, or tactile, or haptics. Students also have to be literate in their flexible use of accessible tools to navigate accessible environments. And yes, I know I put the word accessible in there twice, but I did it on purpose because in order to truly be literate and proficient in having that flexible toolbox of technology, there have to be an adequate number of tools and computing environments that are accessible, okay? Otherwise, the student could be like amazing at learning and using all sorts of technology, but if you don't have the accessible media and environments, there's no access anyways. And then finally, students must be literate in how they can shift the power dynamics in the classroom and in the workplace. And that begins and ends with our students having that sense of entitlement to know that they are entitled to accessing the same information as their sighted peers. And that's how students can make sure that those power dynamics don't become imbalanced in the first place. So this big piece of shifting that power dynamic, of knowing how to rock the boat in a positive way, in a community building way, this is going to definitely help our students transition into the future. And then finally, I'm speaking to the stakeholder audience here. There's a few stakeholders literacy targets as well. So we need to know how to navigate those multiple levels of infrastructure, both starting locally, with our local classroom or school or district, trying to advocate for somebody to help with the alternate media, having the alt media specialist there, accessibility and the procurement policies. And then also, we need to recognize and promote what is needed to move from equity to justice, remembering that we have to address those environmental factors that are needed for achievement. And so without recognizing and addressing those environmental factors, we're always going to be stuck at equity, which is still better than inequity, of course, but I want to also push us forward a little bit to make sure that we can move from equity to that final step of justice. And with that, I conclude my soapbox. Thank you all for listening and for joining, especially during the summer when I know everybody's got a lot of competing plans. And for anybody who came in late, you guys can find me on Twitter at TVI_Ting. And you can also, of course, find me at San Francisco State University. And the university is on all the socials at VI Program SFSU. Thank you.
Oh, yay. So this is Leslie. I am back in the saddle here, and we're bringing our panelists back on. First of all, thank you so much, Ting, for those comments, for lifting us up and presenting just a few things for our panel to chew on and think about and respond to. I want to turn to our audience also and remind you that the Q&A is there to ask questions and to prompt thoughtful questions for our panelists to consider. Ting is going to be joining us on this panel too, and we're really excited. If you have not met the folks on this panel, you're in for a real treat. These are some of my favorite people in the world, and really creative, insightful thinkers about the boots on the ground realities that we're dealing with, and really wonderful, creative, thoughtful, forward-thinking solutions. And so I love that, Ting, you threw out a bunch of forward-thinking solutions, and that's really where we need to be right now. So with that, without further ado, it looks like we've got our panelists up, their cameras are on, and we are going to launch it. First, I'd love to introduce our panelists. We have Diane Bronner, who is she's an orientation mobility specialist, but she's also the editor of Paths to Technology, which is a fantastic, it's bigger than a blog to me. It's resource extraordinaire about all things technology related, expanding all ages. It's just amazing. Anyhow, Diane has sat on our steering committee to develop the technology competencies that Ting mentioned and that we'll be referencing today. So we have Robin Clark, who is assistant principal at Utah School for the Blind, ECC guru extraordinaire, Instagram star, and transition just genius. And so I'm really looking forward to some of her insights here. We have Kate Cadillac, our wonderful associate director of College Success and real true thought partner in all of these things that we're doing here in College Success. And both Robin and Kate served on the steering committee in developing the tech competencies. That's been over a year and a half of time that's led us to this conversation today. So I'm going to play the role of moderator and occasional commenter, while these folks in their brilliance and experience are going to contribute the good stuff here. So without further ado, I'd love to open it up to any of our panelists who want to reflect. Maybe Ting, you're out on this one, but you can comment and reflect on just initially reactions to Ting's comments, alignment with tech standards, your experience, and our thoughts looking forward. Who would like to start?
This is Kate. I'll go ahead and start if that's all right with everyone.
Sure.
Dr. Ting, I just want to thank you so much for your presentation. It was really enlightening, informative, and spot on. You mentioned finding ways for us to rock the boat in positive ways. And I say, let's rock the boat. And that's really this whole initiative, this tech intensive, these conversations is about getting people to feel empowered and passionate about action. So I loved some of the main points that Ting made about students needing to be literate in multiple mediums, using accessible tools, and feeling entitled to information and access. But I especially also loved some of the other points that were made. First of all, about this idea that not using access or assistive technology is a privilege. And I just want us all to think about that for a moment, about what it means to be able to just pick up any device from Target or Best Buy or wherever it is that you get your technology out of the box and be able to use it. And what I will say that I haven't mentioned yet is I am blind and I am a user of assistive or access technology. And I feel privileged here today with you because all of the technology that I own, which is quite a lot, has some type of feature that brings me access. I am a user of screen reading technology. I am a user of Braille and so much more. And here I am, 20 years now, I've been blind, and 20 years ago, I did not feel the privilege that I do today. So I want to recognize that privilege that exists for people with typical vision who can just access any device, but I also really want to acknowledge the privilege that exists in today's world for those of us with disabilities who are now able to access so much more than what there was in the past. So I'll stop there. I have so many more notes, but I want to give Diane and Robin a chance to comment as well.
Who wants to go next? It's unusual to. There we go. It's unusual to have this.
It's impossible to wink at somebody to get the go ahead. So, Kate, you missed a real funny facial expression as somehow I thought I was eyeing Diane to say, "You go ahead," and it was a complete fail because she's smiling nice, and there I am going, "Go ahead." And so, if anybody looked at me and wondered what happened to my eyes, that was me trying to wink, nod, something. Hi, everybody. Robin Clark here. And one thing I'd like to share about myself is I find myself in the space that a lot of teachers who were overwhelmed with their lack of tech skills we're at. And I think that that is something we need to validate, is that if you are a teacher or know a teacher who doesn't have tech skills and you were like, I'm underqualified, and it's frightening, and it's there's so many mixed feelings about this. So I want to share that when I came aboard, I saw the reason. I was there with everybody, but I also looked at my own practice and said, where have I upgraded? And it wasn't just skills with a device, although that was something I needed to acquire, but it was also my full awareness. Was every document I was writing had a heading instead of normal text so that a screen reader or anything would complete? Was that just my standard of practice? It wasn't. I was just doing a document and said, well, I'm sure they'll figure it out. Not malicious, but going back to that idea of universal design, but I also want to say universal awareness. That's what really started for me. Is I stopped thinking about it being separate and equal, and I started looking at it as just integrated. Was I just doing it, period, with the idea of being aware of those needs, setting it up? And like many of you, I was great. I had good things happening. I wasn't a bad teacher. What I wasn't the most effective teacher with my access. And I love that one. I may be lobbying the expanded core gods to rename it assistive technology to access technology, because I don't know about anybody else, but my mind shifted when I heard access, because that clarified, what am I doing? I'm not creating something separate but equal for blind and visually impaired students. I'm creating access, period. And that's my goal. So that was one kind of light bulb. But again, cards on the table. We're not just people, I didn't know any of these skills. No, I mean, I was okay. I knew enough to get by. And I really looked at myself in the mirror and said, girl, you need to be the teacher. You need to be on the ground with this. And so I've shared this before, and I'll say it again. I wasn't paid extra. I wasn't required to develop these tech skills. It was something I felt I needed because that's the teacher I needed to be. And although I have some administrative responsibilities, I still consider myself a teacher first and foremost. And so it was a fun summer learning Braille note touch skills. It was a fun summer doing screen reader skills. It was and it was just extra. Again, I was not paid. I was not required. I didn't get extra pay for knowing these skills. But now when I walk into a classroom, I know I have set that document up the way that everybody needs to access that document. I am aware of those things. I've inserted small things like Grackle. I check my documents. I double check things. I don't build it first and check for accessibility second. I build things and then check the accessibility as I'm typing the plan. And that's just one thing as we go forward with this conversation where we need to be at. And I know for many teachers, you might be coming out on the skinny branches of vulnerability. Don't worry. I got some weight here, and I didn't break the branches. So if I didn't break the branches, neither will you. But it is time for us to look for that and to request that we have those skills and to model it. But it really does, in a lot of ways, start with us in that teacher role. And I'm watching my clock. We could get into so many more things, but that's just what I wanted to share first about my journey. And the Diane and Kate and Leslie every meeting, I would be like, team, I know it. I can do this now. And this is where we're going this. And it was amazing. And this is what I will end with. It was amazing that learning something that was so outside of my wheelhouse, how much it transformed me and my practice. And it's been amazing. I can Bluetooth a Mantis, set it up, get it ready to go. I can switch to a Braille Note Touch Plus. Now my Braille skills needed a little help there, but nevertheless, I knew the keystroke to get me there. But I want to really encourage everybody here as you think about that, and it creates ripples which make waves, and that's where we need, if we want to say that this is so important, then we need to have the skills to demonstrate why it's as important as we're saying that it is. And it's doable. So join us, friends. Okay, now that I can nod and say it, Diane, over to you.
Wow. I don't know if I can come behind you, Robin. You have so much passion and so many good things to say. And again, with Ting, thank you so much for sharing what you've talked about and your knowledge about technology and how we can incorporate access to so many things. I kind of want to just jump on board with what you said, Robin, about how so many teachers are either not aware or feeling very overwhelmed with technology. And I think that's where my passion comes in, is trying to find out ways. I know some great teachers like Ting, like Robin, like all of these folks that are on this panel. I know some great people out there that are doing great things. And my passion is, let's take all of these little pieces and put it together in a place that teachers can come to and find resources. We don't need to reinvent the wheel all the time. So that's what that's pretty much my passion behind Paths to Technology. Our website has lots of lessons in there about how do you teach a PowerPoint to a second grade student. That's a national tech standard for sighted kids. How do you teach a PowerPoint? So what's another thing? What are the national tech standards for general ed kids? What about, oh gosh, there's just so many things. How do you make a Word document accessible? How do you share that universal design with general ed teachers who didn't get that in their training? It wasn't part of their competency testing, like Ting was saying. There's so much out there, and trying to put all of that, those kinds of pieces of information in one place and make it a resource. That's what Paths to Technology is all about. So I think I'll go ahead and let you go ahead and ask some questions, and let's see if we can answer them.
And while we're, I want to throw out one other nugget about the evolution of the technology competencies that Ting so kindly alluded to. They're a project that Robin, Kate, Diane, and I hatched after we met fortuitously at a conference. And we're talking about the very clear deficits our students had when compared to their typically sighted peers as they entered college. And Kate and I were busy working on developing and exploring the reasons behind the college readiness crisis in the field. And it was very clear to me from my background in working with college aspiring students in mainstream education that the students we were encountering were significantly behind in those foundational skills, stunningly behind, and that impacted, my background is also as a learning specialist, it was impacting our students' ability to access information with the same speed, the same autonomy, the same self-determination that students I'd worked with for over 30 years had been having. And it was stunning to me. And it was a clear gap. And so we had an opportunity to sit down over many meetings, and we were creating what we thought were going to be national technology standards, which is, a big kahuna of a name. And, what do you do with that? And so because this is an extraordinary team and we had some super amazing help behind the scenes from a couple of colleagues with Kate in the lead, particularly, we created national technology standards. And if anyone has a desire for some good reading material, it's chunky, it's big, but it's not useful to both Kate, Robin. Kate's having a stroke. It's not ready for prime time. It's not. And we really stopped when we saw how complex it was. It was very clear to us this was not going to be useful for anyone in the field. This field needs support now with the students that are in front of you. And so we pivoted hard. The biggest takeaway from the meetings we had over, I don't know, a year and a half was that nationally, generally, students are gaining, just like reading, you learn to read and then you read to learn. Students are learning technology by 4th or 5th grade, typically at the latest. State technology standards, core competencies are in every single state. And then there are more complex expectations, but the foundational skills to manage Word and PowerPoint type presentations, and I'm using name brands versus specific tools, they're not really taught as skills to students after late elementary school. And yet our students are entering high school, and Kate and I have encountered many. I know that anecdotally, Robin and Diane have shared the same stories, that our students are entering high school or graduating from high school with none of those skills yet, but landing in college without possibly even knowing how to type, much less accessing their email on anything other than their phone. So those were gaps and deficits that were very clear to us we needed to tackle with super concrete tools. So we pivoted hard. We created something called the Technology Competencies, which is going to be a sibling publication to our college readiness checklist that many of you on this call have seen and heard, and is available on the Perkins website. And this Technology Competencies will serve that same tool as a conversation starter, as something that, as Ting said, these are like normal technology skills you would assume any student getting ready to head off to work and college would have. And so it really gives parents and educators a very concrete tool to go, wow, yeah, I hadn't seen it all in one place before, but yeah, that. And allows them to reflect in a more concrete way with the tools sitting in front of them. How do we get there now? And then begin to backwards plan. So that's a little bit of the evolution of the tool Ting alluded to, and the reason Kate, Diane, and I have had such a good time together over the last couple of years. And why we're here today, we're really passionate about creating ways for folks to feel empowered and not overwhelmed, although we get the overwhelm. We often feel that too. And to take Ting's call and observation about the move from equity to justice as we think about opportunities for our students, and the potential that's sitting out there in the students right now who could be accessing information with more autonomy and more self-direction. And that makes me super excited as a learning specialist. And so with that, I want to see, I have some questions ready, but I want to see if Robin, Kate, or Diane have any questions they directly want to ask Ting before I launch into some of the questions that we got from our registrants.
We're all shaking our head no, Kate, just so you know. And I'm secretly saying no with a head shake, but really yes, but we have to get to other questions. So I will have follow-up questions and commentary, but okay. I think what we should do is start with our regular questions, and then we can jump in on other fun moments later.
Okay. Well, so we got one question from a very thoughtful teacher who asks, where does one begin with low vision learners who prefer using sight but a bit of vision, but has good auditory skills? The teacher thinks that he could be faster navigating Google Classroom using different tools, but isn't sure how. They're trying to explore friendlier screen readers in the fall. So that classic transition, right? And I think of this as a yes and situation, right? Yes, there are times and places to use that vision, and there are other tools as well. So boy, there isn't a better panel than this to answer that question. Who would like to start? Everybody's being so polite. I suspect Kate may be bursting at the seams. A thought or two. It's a constant conversation she and I have. Do you want to start?
Sure. Sure. I really love what you said about the yes and, because it's so true. These students who have the ability to use their vision, but who may also benefit from using listening to learn, it's really hard, because oftentimes we know that students are almost always going to choose to rely on their vision when possible. But we know through our experiences, through anecdotes from other students who have been through this journey, we know that there are advantages to learning both the visual reading as well as the Braille and or the auditory reading. And so my opinion is the younger we can give access to these multiple mediums, the stronger a student is going to be, whether their vision is stable, whether it is degenerative. I think across the board, it's a benefit to students to have access to multiple mediums because there are things in the environment that are unstable. Lighting conditions is an example. Transportation and the environment, the setting in which they're riding on a bus or a train, or just not able to access that print in a way that they typically are with optimal conditions at home. There are reasons to rely on other senses. The ability to do so is very powerful, and it doesn't happen overnight. To have a student who, say, is about to graduate high school, go on to college, and then begin the transition to, say, listening through, learning through listening, such as text to speech, that takes a long time for the brain to develop that muscle. And so if we can begin teaching those skills at an early age, by the time students need to rely on them, they're going to have an easier transition. The learning curve is going to be much smaller, and they're just going to be ready. And there may be quite a bit of resistance to doing that, but there are ways to make it fun for students. And again, one thing I loved from Ting's presentation, she talked about the power of modeling these tools. And I hear a lot from students and families about the value of role models with vision impairment demonstrating their use of tools. But we don't need to have a vision impairment to demonstrate to students, especially the younger ones, that these tools exist, that we can use them. So I think it's just so powerful to, as Dr. Ting said, whether or not you have vision impairment with these students, have the Braille display out, turn on that text to speech so that through their incidental learning, they can observe other people using the technology that's going to benefit them so much. Robin and Diane, do you have anything to add?
I would like to jump in here. I'm a very practical person. And so what I'd like to do is to share a couple of links to Passive Technology posts. And I will do that. If you go to Passive Technology and you look up this webinar, when the webinar recording's available, I'll add that to the post. And then I'll also add in the links that I'm talking about, so you have access to those. There's a post about dual media and multimedia. And it talks about the whole thing. Dual media is print Braille, but now we're really doing dual multimedia as print Braille and technology. There's a whole great post on that. There is one about screen readers for low vision students, which is another great post. It has about the need for screen readers, the indicators that your student really should be on a screen reader. What are those indicators? And then it gives some student scenarios. Another post is called Preparing a Low Vision Student to Use the Screen Reader. And it goes through all kinds of specific skills for those low vision kids that will help them, especially for those students that have progressive eye conditions. What do they really need to know early on to help them be ready for a screen reader? And then there's another post that kind of helps explain to parents and general ed teachers. The post is called Bigger is Not Always Better. So understanding magnification and why, if you can magnify it so much that you have to scroll, why that's not really efficient when you're reading a book like War and Peace. So there's different posts out there that have really concrete ideas and information that you can pull from. And again, I will link those in, and Leslie said she will add those to the email you send out after the webinar.
This is Robin. I just want to share one thing that really came to mind, and I loved the answers. I think that was just perfect. I love the practical posts and resources. Thank you, Diane, for that. One thing that I just want to share, and this is not a direct answer to the question. I would like to acknowledge that I am not directly answering that. But I think we need to change our mindset about auditory comprehension skills. And it could just be the neck of the woods that I have hung out in. But a lot of people, when we think about reading or literacy, it is some form of print, braille. And if it's not one of them, it's not reading, it's not literacy skills. And so I just would like to sprinkle in, again, we need to shift that mindset of black or white, because I have a feeling a lot more low vision students would be stronger with their auditory comprehension skills if we really acknowledged that auditory comprehension is for students who are typically developing. Auditory comprehension is not restricted to one type of student. They are for many people, for all people. And so just a little food for thought. I would just like to really stress that auditory comprehension is not just for students who have additional disabilities or can't read traditional print or braille. As we are really learning, and we are truly learning this in this evolution of screen reading and voiceover, etc., that auditory comprehension is really a recognized and important third medium that students really need. And we just need to remove some of that stigma, because I think that's where we see some of our low vision students not want to get into it. And thanks to things like Audible, who have really kind of rebranded that idea that you can read great things by listening. So little food for thought. What I love is mind shifting. So great. That was the sound of my mind shifting, Kate. It made an audible sound, just so you know, as I now am open to things.
Thank you. Ting, I'm wondering if you have any comments on that, because it's so well within the wheelhouse of these essential concepts.
And I feel like this is a question that comes up a lot is, how do we get students buy-in to technology? And, one of the difficulties in that is, our students oftentimes don't see that their typically sighted peers are using text-to-speech or are using dictation. So with the broader and more mainstream availability of these sorts of tools, it's really cool to see that it's not just the VI student who's magnifying, or it's not just the VI student using auditory or dictation. But my personal approach with my students is, when I want to introduce them to a new way of interacting with information, it's got to be fun, it's got to be through play, and it's got to be through experimentation. So it's not me telling them what I think is best for them, but leading these breadcrumbs out so the student can discover for themselves that, oh, I might be able to do this better, or I might be able to finish my homework in 30 minutes instead of spending an hour and then not being able to do more work. So I always involve my students when I do my learning media assessments. We go through the data together, even when they're little guys, even in first or second grade. I'll kind of boil it down to a grade friendly or age appropriate sort of explanation, so they start understanding which senses and when and how might be more efficient than other senses. And then when I introduce a new way of interacting with information, so in this case, let's say they're primarily using their vision, but I feel that maybe tactile or auditory could be beneficial, we're just going to play. We're going to type some letters out and listen to how funny it can sound, or we're going to get a braille display out and just feel how it feels on the braille display, or just listen to the sounds of the pins refreshing. We're going to play with the buttons. And when we actually start trying technology for a real task, it's never going to be high stakes. It's going to be something silly. So, okay, let's look up your favorite roller coaster. And, when we do that, or, I have a student who was obsessed with tsunamis one year. So it was like, okay, let's play with different ways you can look up information about tsunamis. So we're dictating, we're typing, you're telling me what to type. And then once we pull up the information, okay, well, yeah, sure, we can magnify, but you know how to do that. Let's listen to the information and let's kick back and not have to worry about the screen, and let's just relax while we listen to this. So I think it's getting the students buy-in really early on, and helping them make informed decisions on when they might want to choose to use a different sense. And then involving them in the process of trying different tools, and they get to make the choice of the tool they like, and they get to open it out of the box and unbox it and get excited about their new technology. So, you know, sometimes it's a multi-year process between playing, experimenting, and then it could also be an additional year until that student makes a decision for themselves to adopt that technology. And so it can be a waiting game, and I think sometimes we just have to sit on our hands and wait.
Oh, I love that, Ting, and that it ties into the whole coaching model and goal setting. You know, when that we use in Compass, certainly, and that is used in a lot of different areas where you're helping a student become ready to change and make decisions that help them meet their goals. And you're doing that with the tsunami, right? You're doing that patiently in low stakes environments. And it makes me think of a question, Diane, that I know is at the top of your mind. How early do you start all of this? And certainly what we're hearing from Ting and Diane, that's inferred by Robin, certainly is starting early with introducing these, planting those seeds about different ways that we can do a yes and kind of, you can use all sorts of different senses, that it doesn't have to hurt your body to read. And then beginning to do some of that, I you know, I do a lot of educational talk with students and empowering them to understand how they learn. And that visual reading example, a couple of you gave of, you know, reading, you know, when do you start moving a student and introducing auditory reading? And it's when that working memory can't hold much more than that. And I work with students on, you know, how many numbers can you remember in your head? Here's my phone number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. How many numbers can you remember from that? And beginning to help them understand our brain is wired in certain ways, and reading 48-point font is going to serve you maybe in 3rd grade, but Moby Dick is not going to be read in 48-point font because you're going to forget the words that you just read fairly quickly and lose that larger picture that you need for that critical thinking and that that reading mind, Ting, that you alluded to, that Dr. Wolf referred to, that thoughtful, reflective mind that's able to hold the sentences or the paragraphs prior that were just read and reflect on what is currently being read and connect those dots together. That's critical thinking. That's where our students can move into those higher order thinking. And I'm doing super teacher talk here, but of evaluation, of analysis, of that critical thinking that we need to help our students move towards. And all these tools we're talking about now, introducing to an adolescent who may still be grieving and does not want to be different and is wrestling with, do I use a white cane or not? Do I do this or not? I don't want to be different. Asking them to then also be different in these ways at the same time is quite difficult and sort of the antithesis of how adolescents really work. And I love this idea of starting early. So Diane, do you have any other thoughts? Because I think of typing, that conversations we've had about that way of accessing so much of this has to do with tactile skills, both with Braille, but also with using a keyboard and familiarity with that.
Okay, so I definitely think that there's a real need for introducing students to tech really early. So what I'm seeing now in general ed classrooms is that there's 2 real big landmarks on technology use. One is sighted kids are entering kindergarten with technology skills. So they're efficient. They know how to open up an app. They know how to get to the app that they want, to navigate to it, open it up, play the game. You know, these are educational games, they're videos and all of that. They enter kindergarten with these skills already. The kindergarten teachers are not teaching tech skills to the kiddos. Computer teachers are not teaching tech skills to these kindergartners. They're coming in with it. So the first landmark is our students need to be entering kindergarten with basic tech skills, okay? The second big tech landmark is 3rd grade, and that's driven by the high stakes assessments that begin at the end of 3rd grade. In order to access these assessments, you have to have tech skills. So there's a big drive for students to really be efficient and independent on tech skills by 3rd grade. And the research shows that it takes about 3 years to really learn each of those beginning tech skills. So those tech skills need to be in place, the very basic things in kindergarten, and then they need to be specifically taught those first 3 years. So I use this phrase a lot, in that students learn to access technology until 3rd grade. And then students use technology to access learning after 3rd grade.
I'm muted. There we go. Thank you, Diane. And I think we can all agree that there were many nodding heads in that, that commentary. That lays the groundwork and the foundational groundwork to then be able to do some of the play Ting was talking about. And that's very, it's foundational. I have a couple questions that are just popping into the Q&A, and that's why my brain became a little distracted. So let me comment on both of the ones that have come in. We have one question from Jen asking about accessing the college readiness checklist, and I have the link, and I'm going to post it in this in just a moment. But it's on Perkins website in their resources. We have a brand new website that launched yesterday. And so I can very specifically tell you, if you go to the resources tab on the new website that is fully accessible, there is a college readiness sort button that you can click on that will get you to that, and then find it. I'm going to post it right there. There we go. I just posted it. It's a download. And we are literally waiting on the tech competencies, as I said, to premiere in all its beautified glory. And we will send that to you all once we get that in its glory. So it looks like Ting is going to answer Richard Jackson's question. And then someone just raised their hand. If you could type your question in the Q&A, that would help us manage it, please. So Ting, you want to go with Richard's question?
Oh, I just typed it in the chat. Yeah, I just thanked him for his comment and his participation.
Oh, good. Oh, marvelous. Yay. Okay, and we have one more. Jen, I answered that. And let's see, the person with the raised hand, do you want to type your question in? Okay, so I have another question from our friend that's talking about what type of technology skills are needed for a student in a life skills class who just started learning swiping and tapping with VoiceOver on an iPad, but she thinks he may be able to learn JAWS even though he's a novice at keyboard skills. So there's lots of layers to that for sure. And what are those foundational skills that get him ready for that next step and that next step? So I'm wondering if someone wants to take that on.
Could you clarify the question?
Sure, I'll read it one more time. This was a question from an audience from a registration. So it was it was typed a while ago, I believe. So it says, basically, it sounds like she is looking for guidance with a student who's gaining swipe skills and tap skills on an iPad. And he has not advanced to learning JAWS or any screen reader skills beyond an iPad-based skill, nothing keyboard-based that would allow that access to a screen reader beyond VoiceOver on an iPad. And it sounds like what would be the steps that she would need to begin to introduce? And I see Diane nodding her head. I see Ting nodding her head. Does someone want to tackle that?
Go ahead, Ting.
Diane, Ting?
Okay, let me jump in real quick and then Ting, you can take over. So what I would start with is when you're on the iPad and you're using gestures, to go ahead and start teaching Bluetooth keyboard commands for the iPad, because those keyboard commands are very similar, if not the exact same commands that they'll be using with JAWS, NVDA, VoiceOver on a Mac. And those same commands and the same navigation type things. So start with what the student knows and then build out from there.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. There we go. Oh, I have a note from Nancy Shepherdson. This is a very interesting article by Dan Gilliam on auditory organization. Nancy, I know Nancy, and I knew she'd have some thoughts on the auditory comments that may be helpful. He compared students accessing content through both traditional reading and also via a podcast. I know it's a big, it's interesting debate right now in the field. It's been going on as long as I've been involved as a learning specialist, and Nancy's been involved, I know, way longer than me, about what makes air quotes real reading. And, I just, smack my hand on my forehead and say, well, what's the point of reading is getting information into your mind to learn, to create new concepts, to build new ideas, to share an experience with someone else, and so on, right? I mean, we use it as a tool of learning in school, a mode of accessing material for different work environments, to, like I said, share experience and form community in the world around us, manage our life, and so on, right? Reading can be many things. Those of you who participated in Dr. Wolf's lecture or have read The Reading Brain can see the joy of beautiful literature and reading that she shares with all of us in her writing. And so, but that debate still exists. And of note, Nancy, I don't know if you saw, and some of you may have seen, that the ACT, that's the American, well, they just go by the ACT now, which is one of the major standardized testing organizations out there in the world besides the ACT. From what I can see, and I haven't had a chance to read the whole article yet, just announced that they were going to accept whatever IEP accommodations are listed as their standard accommodation for the ACT moving forward, which is a ginormous shift for the ACT. So it really, Jen, I'll answer your question in just a second, but it really highlights the fact that reading is evolving, and if for the ACT to make that shift, the critical reading section on the ACT is like an hour-long, multi-question, long reading task, and that really is beginning to validate, reading is however you access that information and can demonstrate your ability to think and respond to it in meaningful ways and demonstrate understanding. So that's a big one. So it's an interesting question. Jennifer was just asking for our checklist for US states. So Jen, you may have discovered a fun little bug in our brand new website that they may not have added other countries to the pull down menu. And I will email that to you when we're done this conversation. I have my own copy that I can get to you. So I will just do that for you. For those of you from out of the US, we'll make sure that the college readiness checklist is simply emailed to you so you have it and are able to use it, of course. So good. Let me check other questions. None there. Other questions in our group. We've answered a few online. Other reflections or points folks want to make. I would like to throw out a couple of thoughts as we think about access and equity, and we think of what we talk. Kate and I talk a lot about what college ready looks like, right? And it can look a million different ways. But I do think about speed with which a student can access information, pace with which they can digest it, quantity with which they're able to kind of cope with that input and manage and do stuff with it, are things that are meaningful to me as a learning specialist. And it helps me understand how many classes would be beneficial for a student to take, the pace with which a student might consider enrolling in classes. I also think of output of information. I think of a student's ability to take information they've inputted into their brain and their thinking and to mix with their life experience. And then what do they do with it? Often it's, it's an assessment, or it's a conversation, or it's a written piece of material, right? That has organization, structure, standard written English, all of those things associated with it. And I'm wondering if any of these wonderful educators here have any thoughts, reflections on how we consider pacing different profiles of students to gain awareness of what that looks like and feels like for them. I think of students who may have auditory processing challenges and haven't really read a novel independently, a student who may be demonstrating some difficulty outputting with expressive language and creating writing independently. Any thoughts you have about the intersection of the use of technology and moving our students to an awareness of these greater, more complex skills? Robin has her raised hand.
Well, I think this is probably going to be an answer with lots of parts to meet the diverse needs of our students.
Yep.
But one thing that I was really meditating on from what you were saying, and what I've really done with my students, is stop teaching to them and start teaching with them. And that discovery and self-awareness. And before we even start wondering all of these things, I really started with asking my students, and these are my college aspiring students that I'm talking about at this moment, but we can go on to talk about other students. I just started to ask them, how do you like to access information? Because they may have been doing something the way that they were taught, but it wasn't necessarily the way that they actually prefer to learn how to do that, and empowering them to learn their own voice. I actually, so teaching them to say, I actually prefer to listen and have it recorded and then go back and put timestamps, so many different things. But I think a lot of this question starts with students learning who they are. And everybody tends to think that self-determination is simply advocating for yourself. Well, you can't advocate for yourself if you don't know yourself. So a good base point is getting students to be aware of their choices, with allowing them to interact with these choices and to develop a plan with these choices to weigh the benefits of it. And we gave some great examples. So I won't give no ones, but like the example we talked about earlier, let's find out about tsunamis. How did you like doing that? Was it fun? Because we all have these preferences, right? I have a MacBook and I love it. But some people, then other people really like Google Chrome. Some people I can't think of another search engine at the top of my head, which is funny because this is technology. But the point of this is everybody here has preferences that you've learned to love. So let's empower students with knowing those self-awareness questions. Now, what I would encourage teachers to do is write these questions down and give it as kind of the extension activity. Today, we're going to learn, how do you like to look up information? How do you identify if it's truth or fake news? What is fake news? And then give them these opportunities, and then have the students journal. And I kind of call this prompted journaling, because they don't know what they don't know. They might not know how to ask these questions, especially if they've lived in a bubble where so many people are doing things for them, to them, and not with them. So some prompted journals. How do you like to learn? What did you like to do this? Where did you get stuck? How did you think, just some questions. So of course I could go on a complete other tangent on raising self-awareness and self-knowledge, but I think a lot of what you're talking about answers there, because when students get to know themselves, they know their preferences, they know where they can anticipate obstacles, where they can utilize and leverage strengths. then they can get serious about taking those next steps. But if they're just waiting to be those puppets of everybody moving them, we're still not accomplishing what we want. And that is self-determined individuals. And I also want to asterisk this. Being a self-determined individual is not limited to typically developing students. It is for all students. All students can be self-determined. It is okay that they need additional supports or guidelines to accomplish that. So I really feel that that's a starting point to get it going. And then I'm lowering my hand.
Thank you. Ting, I'd love to toss this over to you. And because I think of this topic through when I think of access and equity, and I think of equity and justice, I'm asking questions that are, intellectualized and ideal setups. And your comments really did help us pivot and think systemically about the systems in which these students are learning. And they're learning in many different systems: the VR system, the special education system, the general education system. At whatever grade they're in, the parents are attempting to navigate these as well. We're heading into the last 10 to 15 minutes. I'm wondering if you had any thoughts on how we could begin to think of this moving forward. You've given us access technology versus assistive. Help us expand on this a little.
Well, I think, as a TVI, we take on the bulk of the work about addressing the accessible environment ourselves. And we need more partners. We need help, because the amount of multimedia that needs to be put into an accessible format is overwhelming. The amount of ed tech and educational apps that continue to be developed that are inaccessible is also overwhelming. And not just overwhelming, but it's unacceptable. I really have to give a nod to Natalie Shaheen. She's a good friend and colleague of mine. She's a professor at Illinois State. Natalie Shaheen has done a lot of research and publication talking about the systemic problems of accessibility in K-12. And she has, she's able to speak from a blind person's perspective, and she has herself had to navigate these inaccessible structures. So I think she just tweeted this morning that ed tech is a dumpster fire. And it really is. And I feel like TVIs are the only ones putting the fire out, and the fire is not getting put out. So as much as we can to take advantage of this momentum that's happening, but recognizing neurodiversity, recognizing that, everybody needs some customization and differentiated access, and then helping people access the resources they need to make those infrastructure changes and to start making better decisions about what we buy and what we invest in. That's sort of my soapbox about the infrastructure piece.
No, that's so resonant, because the procurement piece is so much of it. And we know that's, money speaks, and making those needs loud and clear to the extent that we can. I think of the power structure, right? And what political power does a TVI have as an itinerant versus a parent, and helping lift each one of those energies up to speak to their district, to speak in different environments, and hopefully sending energy into the universe to help support that. But it's the takeaway from that I hear is that we need to speak about how these needs are expanding with the multimedia world we're engaged in, that they are that our students are missing out on essential material because the multimedia materials that are being presented require more and more and more adjustment versus that original universal design that would be preferred, and that we need to be empowering ourselves with the language to speak about this in the different stakeholder groups that we engage with. Does that sound like a relatively brief summary?
Oh yeah.
Oh, good. Okay, good. Awesome. Well, go team, everyone. So with that, I want to see if anyone has any closing thoughts, comments as we begin to wrap this up. I I know that anyone on this call, any one of us talk about this for a very long time. So I want to keep us focused on equity and justice and the related issues of technologies. We've been pretty good today. But if there's any concluding thoughts, ways forward, if any of members of our audience have additional commentary, thoughts that they'd like to share, I'd love to do that this very much. We'd love to have you as part of the conversation. Anyone want to start? Kate?
This is Kate. Sure. I've been thinking a lot about how important it is for us to have these conversations with students. We are able to identify when there's a lack of equity or justice, but our students aren't always. And too often they aren't even aware of the effort, time that goes into making documents and other tools accessible. So I think that we need to help our students understand and develop a realistic sense of when things are inaccessible, how they are then turned into accessible formats, and better yet, how the students how we can get them involved in making things more accessible. And along those lines, we also really need to make sure that we are offering authentic feedback to our students about their current skills, about their current pace when it comes to reading, writing, and other academic tasks. Because again, too often our students are being told that they're great simply because they're blind or visually impaired or have other disabilities. And they may be great in so many ways, but they may have deficits and they may not be on par with their typically cited peers when it comes to reading rate, when it comes to reading comprehension, when it comes to writing and research. And not that we want to be too candid or harmful in our remarks when we're delivering this authentic feedback, but I think there are ways to help empower them to understand that they're not currently, if they're college aspiring, that they're not currently reading on grade level, that they still have a ways to go before they are able to keep up with the pace or the quantity of reading that is typical of college-going students, just as an example. And while we're doing that, of course, helping to uplift them and realize all the other amazing things that they're doing, it's a balance. But I just, as Robin especially was talking about building self-awareness, I'm thinking of the value of building their awareness of the passing of time, how much time they're spending on tasks, building their awareness of what college readiness means, what college level requirements are, or for the younger students, what does it mean to be going on to the next grade level? What expectations are going to be heightened for them as they progress through their schooling? And how can we start prepping them, prepping their minds and their willingness to engage in some really difficult tasks so that we can really get them to a point where they're ready to take on more.
Thank you, Kate. Anyone else want to give us any concluding thoughts? Robin? Oh, what are your thoughts?
The ever quiet Robin Clark again. There's one thing that I want to say is, and I completely agree, amen, hallelujah, to what Kate said. I think it's easy for us to feel overwhelmed. Where do we start? We've got to focus on this, getting the students ready. I've got to learn all of this stuff. I don't know if my special ed administrators, wow, if I know as somebody who is swinging for the fence to make changes for students with vision impairments, it is easy to feel like I just need a Xanax and an Oreo because there's so much. And it's easy to feel alone, especially if you're an itinerant teacher who just feels like you are out there against the world. And one thing I want to encourage you is you're not. Reach out. Aside really from Kate, I didn't know anybody else, and I met everybody else through different ways. And when I get stuck, I send a message. Use that social media connections. I've collaborated with so many other great like-minded teachers who taught me something. There are tech support groups. Hi, I don't know how to do this. I posted getting started with Braille Note Touch Plus. Anybody have ideas for resources? Anybody want to work with me? I think that's one of the things I really want to encourage our teachers is that if you're stuck not knowing how to do something, you're not as alone as we used to be 15 years ago in our field. Thanks to technology here, Zoom right away. So many things. So please put it out there. I'm really talking about past the technology as well. If it's not there, send Diane a question and say, does this exist? Because if you are wondering it, somebody else is as well. So I wanted to just leave you with some parting thoughts. Where do you get started? The first thing is just start. Whether you're starting on a screen reader, you're going to start on a Braille Note Touch Plus, you want to try an educational app. The idea is to start, put yourself out there, realize that this is about you, and some people might leave you behind and some might not, but put yourself out there, go for it. There are resources available because there is a large and ever-growing community of diverse professionals who are committed to preparing students for this 21st century world. And it's free. You can probably call me any day of the week and I talk to you for free for like more than you wanted, and send you any resource that I could. So anyways, just really wanted to say that the time has come for us to push the needle, and it is doable, and we can do it. We can just reach out, get started, make a mistake, do it with our students, hang in there, but the time has come. We can do it. We really can push the needle for access for our students on so many levels and for so many different types of students.
So thank you so much, Robin. Diane, any closing thoughts, and then I'll hand it over to Ting.
Sure. I think what the ladies have already said, yeah, I completely support. I think one of the things that I'm seeing is that we need to start with the tech really young, and we need to keep up with the national tech standards at each grade level. So not to wait until high school and say, oh yeah, I'm college bound, and their keyboarding skills are non-existent. You know, we need to be working on those things way back in elementary school so that it's not a problem when you hit high school and college readiness time frame. And I think reaching out to others, there is somebody that has figured out your question. So connecting up with somebody else to figure out, you know, to find that mentor. Quite often I have a third grader, I'm not joking, I have a third grader that I ask my tech questions to that can answer those questions. You know, find somebody that knows something. And if you don't, put that question out there, and that means that's a question that we need to come together and answer together. So I'm really excited about some of the work that's going on with app developers. It takes a long time for an app to be created and to be out there publicly. And I know of some really terrific things that are coming up that are totally accessible and we'll have our hands on in the near future and in the next year or so. So, you know, just be aware that things are changing and be a part of that change. If you have an opportunity to answer a survey from an app developer or a researcher, jump on it and give your input. That's the time that they're working to create something usable for you in the future. So jump in on those conversations as well. I think it's a very exciting time. We've learned a lot through the pandemic. One of the things that I think I see nationally that has been that has come out of the pandemic is if you're not a tech person and able to teach that tech to your student, you don't have to have somebody in your school, in your district to do that. Jump on board in one of these virtual trainings that are being offered. Have your student jump on board. You no longer have to be a master of everything in this digital age because there's support out there through Zoom meetings and Zoom trainings to get your student where they need to be. So just be aware that there's so many resources that can help us.
I love that. And you captured the piece I wanted to definitely say, which is we don't have to be everything to everyone. And we've exceeded the capacity of any one person really being able to address the needs of I just keep saying this, extraordinarily diverse student body that you all work with. And so please, all you wonderful people out there, take that home with you. You do not have to be everything to everyone. And to Diane's point, there really are amazing virtual classes out there for our students now. So, so it does not have to just be you, and that can sometimes freeze us all because we're not perfect. And we want to be perfect for our kids, and it's a really normal human thing to freeze. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Ting for any final comments before I wrap up.
Sure. Yeah, I was just thinking of, the Google machine has made it so much easier for us to find information. We just need to know enough about technology to know what the search terms are in order to find more information. So I guess just two things I wanted to leave with. One is that if you do have that student who needs a little bit of extra support to really be ready for that successful transition, thinking about giving them a super senior year. Especially as students are entering their junior and senior years, that workload gets more intense. This is when you're going to start seeing those breakdowns in efficiency. And a lot of times students just need to take a reduced course load. Maybe it means walking with their graduating class and then taking a super senior year where they can still have the support of a TVI and O&M instructor, finish out their 1 or 2 remaining classes, and maybe take a class or 2 at the community college and get some really scaffolded help with that transition. I've seen that be very successful. And then finally, just to tag along with everybody else has said, to just keep connecting with people, having that community of practice to support your ongoing informal learning and adventures with technology, and figuring out some way to keep moving, as the technology shifts under our hands or under our feet, is to invest in those communities of practice, whether it's online, but also figuring out if you can schedule some techie TVI meetups in your local area. Even if it's just once a month or once every couple of months. I usually round up a bunch of people in the Bay Area and, just go to a wine bar, go to a beer garden, and you have to have fun talking about technology so that it's not always such a drag. And, you have to kind of struggle together and troubleshoot together. And I feel like as we're 2 minutes from 5 p.m., that's a good way to kick off and say, go to happy hour and talk technology and have fun with it.
I love it, Ting. Well, I have had a lot of fun talking technology, both before this session and now. And I so appreciate everybody's contributions, this thought of these micro efforts that we're talking about in front of us, responsibilities and activities and limitations and political considerations that you have to consider in every building that you're in. Schools maybe not allowing that extra senior year. Perhaps we can help normalize that in the special education community, because that is about funding issues, and we all understand that. But it's also this macro idea and that's a segue to it of allowing the special ed community to understand that we're asking our students to do a lot. And there is often not enough time to learn all the skills they need to learn everything that their typically sighted peers are, and all the skills they need to access it. And so I think of micro and macro, and to those who are listening, I think some of us are probably better micro, some of us are better macro, some of us can dance between the two, and whichever it is that makes you, do you. Whether it's the tech talk in your favorite coffee bar or wine bar, or a Zoom meeting with super nerds like the ones on this call, which I think we can all acknowledge we're super nerds. I appreciate everyone joining us today. I so appreciate Ting's contributions to this conversation and willingness to join us today in the second tech conversation. I would love to continue this as the year goes on, so stay tuned, keep an eye on Perkins and the college readiness resource that will be coming out that we'll let you all know about. And thank you all for joining us tonight. It's 5 o'clock on the nose and we did it, people. So thank you again, have a great night. Thank you for joining us.